Selecting a sales kickoff speaker can be a daunting task, and that's why I've put together a list of the 15 things you need to look for to make sure that your speaker knocks your SKO out of the park. Now, for those that don't know me, my name is Matthew Pollard, and I actually was just listed by Selling Power magazine as their sales kickoff speaker of the year, which means I know exactly what it takes to make a sales kickoff event an amazing success. And whether you hire me or not, this list of 15 items will ensure that you pick the exact right speaker for you. Now, the first thing you need to decide is what type of speaker you're looking for. Are you going to hire a speaker that's a celebrity or a sports star? Maybe you just really want to impress all the attendees with the person you were able to bring to your event. Or are you looking for a topic matter expert or a motivational speaker? Now, I will tell you, I have seen a lot of amazing topic matter experts be motivational speakers as well. So don't feel that you have to choose one or the other. If you're looking for an amazing SKO speaker, you might want to find somebody that can not only uplift everybody in the room, but also give them the strategies that they need to absolutely excel. Now, one of the things that I do want to say is when considering hiring somebody, whether it's a motivational speaker or a sports star or a celebrity, you want to make sure that the content that they share with everybody is still relevant to their day-to-day jobs and is actually going to give an amazing outcome. The number of times I've spoken alongside a sports star or some form of celebrity, and they've just gone and done their standard talk, but it didn't really give the value any speaker should in a great SKO. So I'm not saying don't hire a celebrity or a sports star. What I'm saying is if you do hire one, make sure that their content is really applicable, or the learning is really applicable in the day-to-day lives of your sales team. Because at the end of the day, you want your speaker to drive ROI. And the same goes for motivation. If it's not completely applicable to your sales team, you'll be able to find a motivational speaker that will be able to provide amazingly applicable content. So don't shortchange yourself. Now, the next thing I really want to highlight is that you want to check to make sure that whatever content is shared by the speaker is something that can be instantly implemented or easily operationalized. You know, I speak on storytelling a lot when I'm doing SKOs, and what I find is that a lot of organizations that have hired me have tried storytelling implementations in the past that have taken 8 months to operationalize, and they failed to do so. So you want to make sure, especially with sales kickoffs, what happens is they come, they enjoy those few days, they get some great value, but then they go straight back to their targets, and it's so easy for all of that information to be lost. So what you want to make sure is that whatever speaker you hire is able to allow the group that they're speaking to instantly operationalize what they've been taught, or are able to do it in a very, very short period of time. One of the things that I do when I'm delivering SKOs, when I talk about storytelling, is I get everybody in the room to tell their partner a story and vice versa. And then I invite somebody up on stage and I get them to share their story. And everybody in the room thinks it's an amazing story. And I get everybody to agree to that, because it's always a big extrovert or somebody that's been there for a long period of time and is just excited to share their story. And then what I will do is I will ask a few questions, and then I will tell the story back to them in a way that they wished they could do it. And that gets everybody in the room to go, wow, that happened in 8 minutes, not 8 months. And that is an instant transformation. Now, I then get everybody to work on an exercise afterwards so they can work with their partner to improve their stories. You want an exercise like that to happen in the room to create that, wow, I can do this tomorrow, or at least something that can be done over a period of weeks, not months. Otherwise, you can lose traction. Now, I will say a lot of people get a speaker that can talk about an entire sales system. Now, that's fine if the sales system is already part of the sales team's day-to-day. But if it isn't, then I would highly recommend focusing on one practical implementation that can be instantly operationalized, and then another one in the next year's SKO, and then another one in the next year's SKO, and then eventually you'll build up to a total sales system implementation. Otherwise, what you'll find is that you'll introduce a sales methodology and you just won't get traction, and then you'll look bad for trying. And that's the last thing that I want for you. I want to make sure that the SKO speaker delivers you amazing value, and people are not just saying that it was an amazing speaker we had last year, but they've actually applied that content and got to a phenomenal outcome for themselves and driven ROI for the organization. Now, The next thing that I would really suggest is when you're considering a speaker, make sure that they not just have great ideology, but they have the experience to back up that it actually works. You know, one of the things that I find is a lot of speakers come from I worked in a corporate job, I was a sales trainer, and now I'm speaking for a living. That's just not what I would recommend for anyone speaking on stage. Now, I'm not saying that they're not massively useful, but what I'm highlighting is those are the people you would hire for like a half day or a full day training, or for them to go and do some form of roadshow across your organization, across the nation, or across the globe. What I would suggest is anyone you get up on stage has been the #1 performer in their organization, or even better, they've created some really successful businesses of their own. You know, one of the things that I talk about when I go up on stage myself is I talk about the fact that I was an introverted person with a reading speed of a 6th grader. I was super introverted, and I only fell into sales because I lost my job just before Christmas and I couldn't get another job, and commission-only sales was the only organizations hiring at the time. And because of that, I took that job and went out and practiced selling door to door with really no sales training at all, only 5 days product training. But then I became the #1 salesperson in the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere, really by teaching myself how to sell watching YouTube videos. And that really gets everybody to say, wow, this person's credible. Now, sure, I went on to be responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories. So having a speaker that has had successful businesses in the past as well also creates credibility, but you want to make sure that they've obtained sales success, not just business success. So if you get a speaker that has sales experience and successful business experience, then you're in for an absolute treat at your SKO. Now, the next thing that I would highly recommend is that whatever speaker you hire, and I know when we think about keynote speeches, 45-minute to a 60-minute keynote, that sometimes it's not even expected that they have tangible templates and things like that, but I would always recommend it. Ask the speaker, are you providing some form of template or some form of quick reference guide that the attendees can utilize in order to implement the ideology that you share? Because the problem is, and I see this happen all the time, is you get a speaker that kind of blows people away, but then people go home after the event and they totally forget about it, and they don't feel like they've received anything tangible that they can use to apply it. They've got to really try and remember all of the content. Now, if you read anything on the forgetting curve, statistics highlight that people remember very little even after a couple of weeks of a presentation. So because of that, you really want to make sure the person that you hire gives them something that they can quickly reference. Now, a lot of speakers will say, well, I have a book that talks about that, and I really would recommend against that. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's always great to give the attendees a copy of the book of the speaker that they just heard, but if you don't have the budget for that, or even if you do, you really need to make sure that they've got an easy reference guide. Like, for instance, the storytelling keynote that I provide, I actually have a 1-page template that explains the framework of the story, and then I make sure that they can write on the back a couple of the specific notes, and I mention it from stage, so that template is very valuable. As a matter of fact, I always advise people that if they print it in black and white, sometimes it gets lost on somebody's desk, but if they print it in color, I've found that template is still on people's desks the next year, a year or two later, and that makes people constantly remember the value that their organization gave them, as well as constantly continues to remind them to use the content provided. And that's why I always suggest make sure the speaker is willing to provide something that's an easy reference. Now, some people might say, oh, well, I'll give you the chapter of my book. That's still way too much. They're not going to have that sitting on their desk. You're looking for some form of easy template or reference. Okay, now the next thing I would highly recommend is that any speaker that you hire, you want to make sure that they've got stage presence. I always find that a sales kickoff speaker is best first thing in the morning to really set the tone of the event, or straight after lunch, because a lot of the speakers that you have, especially the speakers in senior leadership, they're not going to have the stage presence to really motivate and energize people. Now, if you've got a person in your organization that can do that, that's terrific. A lot of speakers really don't have the ability to be that shot of adrenaline that you need for a lot of the perhaps people that have just arrived and they're jet lagged, or the people that are kind of lethargic after lunch. So you want to make sure that whoever you hire is really, really energetic energetic and provides that shot of adrenaline. Now, the other thing I would really highlight here is that you want to make sure that they also don't make the presentation all about themselves. You know, I see people constantly get up and they talk about what happened to them and, you know, what they learned from this. And a lot of times it leaves the attendees thinking, my gosh, I've just heard the word I about 100 times. And because of that, they really don't connect with the information. So whatever speaker you hire, you want to make sure is not only energetic, but actually is sharing stories of external use cases about how other people's lives were transformed, or the ideology in a way that really highlights that it can be used by them in specific ways, but doesn't make it all about them. And please, a lot of speakers want to put their books up on screen and they want to talk about their books because they use it as a sales opportunity. I'd really want to make sure that you've confirmed that they don't do that, because, you know, that just leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. And also, you've paid for the speaker, and a lot of the attendees, when they see that, they're like, oh, maybe they got a discount on the speaker because he was allowed to promote his books and things like that. So really confirm they don't promote their books when they're speaking from stage. Okay, the next thing is really important. Of course, the speaker's not going to understand everything about your organization and the product sets that you offer. But I have been on stage after other speakers where I have seen them kind of deliver a presentation that was lackluster because they just didn't understand. I'm not going to mention the speaker's name, of course, but he's a big deal speaker in sales kickoff world, and yet he spoke at an AI company that I also spoke at, and he kept saying, what you do is really complicated. I mean, I don't really even understand it. There were certain statements like, and that would be relevant to you, right? And he was doing that from stage, and I feel that that just really, again, makes everybody in the audience go, well, there's nothing here for me to learn. Now, one of the things that I always focus on is doing a ton of research beforehand, especially when I'm doing these story transformations, because if I'm going to transform a story, I need to understand the acronyms in the business, especially in complex situations like technology, finance, and insurance. I really need to understand exactly what's going on in that organization in order to transform the story successfully. So I do a ton of research, and I would recommend that whichever speaker you hire, you want to ask, what research do you do before coming to a presentation? Because if they're not doing research, or if they say, oh, I do some quick research, and if they don't share a methodology for the research that they make and how they go about it, and if they don't ask you for extra materials, that's a pretty big warning sign that they may say they do some research, but they really don't. And that brings me to my next point, because if a speaker is going to do their research, then they should also go the extra mile and customize their presentation to your unique SKO objective or SKO theme. You know, the number of times I see speakers that just deliver the same presentation off the shelf every time because they haven't done any research, and because of that, it's obviously hard to customize or even offer anything relevant into the presentation. But some people do their research, but then they still don't customize the presentation to show that research. You know, one of the things that I'm big on is making sure I do my research, and then, while I don't change every slide, there are a few slides where I say, how can we use story to do this, and this? And it's all around the objectives of the organization or the theme of the organization. And I will say that sometimes a lot of the people that you may be speaking to haven't really thought about the objectives. So you really should push them to think about that, and then make sure that the speaker that you hire is going to do their research and customize for that objective. You know, this is particularly important if your organization has acquired a whole bunch of companies recently, or they've recently been spun off. I'll give you an example. Like when I speak at organizations, a lot of times I've found out there's a whole bunch of people that are now there because of an M&A, and now they're in the audience, or they've been spun off, or something's really not going well in the organization, and because of that, the salespeople are a little shook up. And what I've been able to do throughout my presentations is not just give them ideology and customize the ideology to their specific needs, but also build in a transformation of their mindset throughout the process. Now, storytelling, I have to admit, is a little easier to do that, because the great thing about story is, well, I teach story through story, and while I'm doing that and doing the story transformations, I can seed in what the organization or the senior leadership wants the salespeople to be thinking about the organizational story, or what makes the organization amazing or the culture amazing within inside the organization. So you can really set a different mindset that everybody runs out the next day with. So I would just suggest for you that firstly, know what your objective and theme is before you ever select a speaker, and then make sure they're willing to customize for that and really help set the tone of the event. That's why I love when a speaker or an SKO speaker speaks in the morning, because it really sets the tone for the rest of the event. Maybe you have the president speak or the CEO speak, and then you go straight in to the SKO speaker to really bring that energy up for the entire room, but also to lead off what the CEO has said. Now, that brings me to my next point, which is that any speaker that you hire should offer or even want to sit in and watch the president or the CEO's presentation as well, because I've found that the best SKO speakers are able to quickly hear what the president has said and then adapt that straight into their presentation on the fly. Now, you want to make sure they do their own research and customize, otherwise that's all they'll do to do it on the fly. So make sure that they're going to do their research, make sure they'll customize, and then ask them whether or not they're willing to sit in on that speech. Because what I find is if you don't do it in that order, they'll then say, well, yes, I customize because I'm going to sit in and watch the president's speech. And I feel that you need to understand the organization far better than just hearing the CEO speak and then getting up and speaking. Now, on that note, I always recommend as well that the speaker volunteers or requests that they sit down with the president or at least the senior leadership about 30 days from any SKO event. And the reason I suggest that is that allows them to understand whether there is any specific hurdles, struggles that they can build into their presentation. It also allows them to request extra information. I always do that call sort of 45 to 30 days close up to the event. And when I do that, I'm always asking for other resources, trend documentation that I may not be able to find online that would really help me customize my presentation. But also what comes up in those dialogues is the CEO might say, I'm really worried about this, or I really want you to focus on this. And because of that, it really allows you to create this really robust, I walk off those calls with pages of notes that I can customize my presentation with. And so if a speaker doesn't ask for that, you should ask if they're willing to. And if they're not, I wouldn't suggest hiring them for your SKO, because the truth is they're always going to deliver a far more cookie cutter presentation. Now, the next thing I should highlight is a lot of people believe that the keynote speaker or the SKO speaker should really just come, do their 45-minute keynote and then leave. I would always suggest that you ask the speaker how you can involve them in the rest of the day. And now sometimes this isn't possible for especially some of the highly booked SKO speakers because they've got to get to the next venue. But truthfully, especially if you're asking them to speak in a place that they live or a country that they live, usually they can get from place to place pretty quickly. But one of the things that I would suggest is you ask them, would they be willing to go to a lunch after their presentation? I never suggest before, because if you ask them to come to a dinner or something before, the only question they're going to get asked is, what are you speaking about tomorrow? But if you ask them to come to a lunch or a dinner after their presentation, then what you'll find is people will come and ask them questions, and that becomes really like an impromptu coaching session or implementation session, which is really, really powerful. Because I work with a lot of introverts, the books you see behind you, they've sold about 100,000 copies, and they talk about networking for introverts and sales for introverts, because the truth is, a lot of introverts believe that they can't sell, which is why they don't put in the effort to learn ideologies. And that's why I always build a little bit of that into every one of my presentations. But the thing that you'll find, because I speak to introverts, I always want to stay around for a lunch or a dinner, because I have this no introvert left behind policy. And because of that, you'll find I'll go to a lunch or a dinner, and that way introverts can come up to me and ask me questions when everybody else isn't looking. And I find that is just a really powerful way of giving back to the organization, but making sure that also everybody that has a question can ask it. Now, sometimes that's not possible, but I also allow all the people to connect with me on LinkedIn. And for those people that don't know, you can actually send audio messages with LinkedIn now. It's actually a wonderful sales tool and a great way to get people back to the table talking talking to you if they've ghosted you. But I suggest that attendees are welcome to send me an audio question because it allows up to 60 seconds, which means they have to think about their question before they ask. They can't, go on and on about the question. And it allows me to give them a really concise answer. And you can ask the speaker, are they willing to stay around for a lunch or a dinner? Or if they're not, are they willing to answer questions through a LinkedIn audio message like I just suggested? Or could you collate all the questions through some form of, live chat at the event or after the event surveys? And then can you send those to the speaker for the speaker to record a video like this, just answering all the questions? And again, if they're not willing to do that, I would really think twice about hiring them, because some speakers get up on stage to speak. Other speakers get up on stage in order to see their ideology make a real difference in the organization. And if that's not what they're getting up on stage for, then I wouldn't want them speaking at my SKO. Now, the other thing that you can ask is, are they willing to do any follow-on events or trainings on that same day? What I find is a person that comes and speaks for 45 minutes can make a really great impact and really give some amazing content. But the hardest thing is getting them there. Once they're there, they're usually happy to do something a little bit more detailed for senior leadership or to do a workshop while they're there as well. And what I find is you'll end up paying that speaker to come back and do something like that next month, next year, when you could get them to do it right there on the same day. And well, you might pay a little bit extra. I have a rule that when somebody hires me to speak, they get me for the day, because for me, I'm all about making sure that people implement the ideology. I don't just go on stage because I want to speak. I go on stage because I want everybody to get an outcome with the ideology that I've provided them. So because of that, if I get asked to do an extra 90-minute session to help them really deep dive into it, or work with the leaders right there on the day in order to help them understand how they can roll this in to their hiring practices, their leadership practices, I'm always open to doing those things. And I would suggest that you hire a speaker that has lots of content that they can draw upon to do all sorts of things during that day, not just deliver the 45-minute presentation. Now, that's not to say that you can't just hire them for a 45-minute presentation, but I would highly recommend that if you're going to pay a speaker to come, their content is always, well, should be, if they've done their research, going to be more on point than any other thing that you do. And the truth is, a lot of people do these sessions with all of their project leads. There's just so much overwhelming content that they could find in the online portals anyway, and a lot of that isn't remembered. So I would always recommend utilizing that speaker as much as you can, why they're there, so that you get as much value as you can and an ROI for the money that you paid that speaker. Now, the next thing I would suggest you ask is, what can they do to help excite the people coming to the event prior to the event? Now, of course, they're going to say, oh, well, you can buy my book. I would suggest that if they don't say something like, well, I've got some great promotional videos that really give snippets of my content, and I would really suggest that you share that in advance. And a lot of times what I do, because I've spoken at some really big events where they've used me to sell tickets to their events. I spoke at Microsoft Inspire as one of 10 featured speakers for their 80,000 people event. And because of that, well, it sounds like an honor, but it comes with a lot of homework. You have to, create these videos that they can use with the organizational logo and the date of the event. So we now do that for everybody. They can be shared through intranet, they can be shared via email, because you want everybody to get excited. You want them to start to research the speaker's content beforehand. Oh, and that brings me to my next point. You want to be able to ask them whether or not there's any pre-study work that people can do. Now, of course, some of the people in the audience won't have reviewed that pre-study content. So you need to make sure that the content they provide doesn't take from the presentation or isn't an expectation that they've watched it. But for a lot of people, if they're given pre-study work, they'll review it, and that means they can move further or take more advantage of the speaker's time while they're there watching the presentation. So ask for promotional videos to get people excited, ask for pre-work if they'll provide it, and if they're not willing to do that, again, think about whether or not you're willing to hire this speaker, because it's a big investment, probably the best investment of the SKO event. I mean, definitely far more than the food that people will forget, the alcohol that people perhaps won't even remember. So you want to make sure that if you're paying a speaker, the ROI comes pre and during the event. And lastly, after the event, because one of the things that I find is a lot of people miss that when they hear a speaker speak, especially a content expert or a motivational speaker, you want to make sure that it gets implemented afterwards. So what I always recommend, ask the speaker if they're willing to do these two things. The first one is meet with senior leadership 30 days after the event so that they can ask questions about how to best apply the topic matter or how to implement things the right way. Because what will happen is in that 30 days, they'll get some questions, they'll struggle to do the implementation sometimes, or, they'll come in with, well, we tried this and this didn't work, this worked great, but now we're getting asked this. Because of that, if you have a 30-minute session or an hour session with the speaker 30 days after the event, it becomes really, really powerful, because what happens is a lot of the leaders are then excited and they're starting to see some momentum, but then the speaker can build out a step-by-step plan to allow them to continually operationalize the content. And that means that they continue to push the ideology forward inside their organization. Now, the other thing I heavily recommend is that you ask them if they're willing after the event to do a Q&A video. And what that means is people in the organization can all submit their questions, and then person then answers all of those questions on a recording so that everybody gets those answers. Now, of course, I always recommend that it goes to someone in the organization who collates the top 5 to 10 questions so that you don't have the speaker doing a video for a whole day. But the top 10 questions, they should be willing to record a video for 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and that should be considered part of their presentation, because those questions mean that people aren't going to operationalize the content, and you need to make sure you break down that barrier, and the speaker should want to do that for you. Now, the next thing that I think is critical to any speaker being successful is that they're actually contactable. I find that a lot of speakers, they want to put you through an admin person, and because of that, you don't have a direct dial number for them. And that can get tricky. You want to make sure the person is on site. You want to make sure that they can easily reach out to you, and you can easily reach out to them if there's any questions, concerns leading up to the event. So one of the things you'll find with me is I give the people that I'm speaking for, I say there's one person or two people that are allowed to have instant contact with me, or at least as close as I can, because, obviously I might be speaking at an event and may not check my voicemail for several hours, or, we might be in a different time zone, but I want to make sure that somebody has my cell phone number, and if they miss me, they can leave a detailed voicemail message and I can leave a detailed voice message back. And on that, you kind of do want to make sure, though, that the speaker has a team, because a lot of speakers do this as more of a hobby, or they don't run it as a real business, and because of that, getting in contact with them sometimes can be harder. So you want to make sure before you hire a speaker that they are willing to give you a cell phone number to make them easily contactable, and they have a team to back them up. So if they're off speaking in another country, you can still get on their schedule, or you can get something answered that you need. Planning an event, there's a lot of moving parts, and you want to make sure that you have the answers you need as soon as you need them. And so we've always prided ourselves on having a strong team that communicates quickly, but also me being one of the easiest speakers in order to get in contact with. And I want you to make sure, no matter who you hire, they're willing to do that for you as well. Now, while not on the list of things to look for in a speaker, you probably are also wondering, how much you should be paying a speaker. And I will say there are speakers that range across lots of different fees, but I would say that if you're only looking to spend a few $1,000s on a speaker, then you probably aren't going to find someone that does motivation and content. You're also not going to be able to ask for a lot of these things unless they're an emerging speaker. And because of that, again, they're going to have a little bit less stage presence, and they're going to be a little bit less impactful on stage with their content just because they haven't practiced it enough. So you want to make sure that the budget that you pick is high enough to command amazing talent, because think about how much you're spending on food, on flying everyone in, on probably alcohol and other things. And you don't want, hiring a speaker is a rounding error compared to those line item costs, but you want to make sure that you're paying that speaker enough in order to get them to deliver. Now, I will say there are some speakers that charge ridiculous amounts amounts too. But you want to make sure that you pick a fee that allows you to get some great talent. And there are some great speaker bureaus out there that will help you get an understanding of what ballpark you need to be looking at for a price in order to get amazing talent. And that way, at least then you know, and even if you go to the speaker direct, you at least know when they quote their fee, if they're in that ballpark, then they're probably well practiced and they actually know what they're doing. If they go way lower than that, then you probably know they're either an emerging speaker or they're not speaking that often or they're not that good. And so knowing your budget and knowing what budget commands great talent is really, really crucial. Now, I know I covered a lot in this video, and I hope it was valuable to you to really get an understanding of what to be looking for from an SKO speaker. But if you have any questions, I don't want you to feel like you have to hire me as your SKO speaker. If you have any questions at all, please connect with me on LinkedIn, and you're welcome to send me an audio message, and I'd be delighted to answer those audio messages for you. You're also welcome to just post a question below this video, and if I feel like it requires a lot more detailed explanation, you might find that I'll create a totally new video for you. If on the other hand, it's something quick or simple, or I have a template that I can direct you to, then I will absolutely send that, or write a comment for you directing you to that, or just answering your question as well. You're also welcome to go to MatthewPollardSpeaker.com, and I actually have blogs on how to select a great SKO speaker, as well as why storytelling, even if you don't hire me as your storytelling sales speaker, makes such a wonderful implementation or a wonderful SKO talk or topic that will really add value to your entire SKO event. But thank you everyone for watching this video. I hope you got amazing value out of it. And there are a ton of other videos just like this that you can find on my channel. So feel free to peruse the videos there. And again, if you have any questions, post them in the comments. I'd be delighted to answer them for you. Thank you so much.